You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Hobb,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Wendy Holden back on the show with me today. She has an amazing new book. It's called The Duchess, and what a phenomenal book this is. If you loved Wendy's book from last year when she was on the show, you're going to love this one. The Governess was such a great book, and now The Duchess is it is now available. We can hold it in our hands. If you love those books, you're going to love this one. Welcome back to the show, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Hank, and thank you for being so kind about The Duchess. I'm so pleased that you enjoyed it.
Oh, it's such a fantastic book.
Thank you.
How's your year been since we spoke last time?
Oh gosh, well, a bit on the kind of confined side, I expect, like everybody's. It's been. I mean, it's nothing much happened until I can't really remember when it all started to open up. But most of the time I was writing The Duchess, it was lockdown. I think it sort of started to come out. Everyone started to come out of their holes in about June, July here in Britain. But it's been a bit tricky, and of course it's still very bumpy, as of course it is for you. So yeah, not been the best of years. I won't be sad to see the back of it, I have to say.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's an interesting thing, Wendy, because I've talked to lots of writers who, writers are sort of solitary folk
Sure.
that spend a lot of their time, in an office, with their computer or notepad or whatever it is, and without a lot of external communication, shall we say, or there are periods of that time, in a writer's life where you seem to be kind of sequestered away. What's interesting is the rest of the world has been experiencing what writers get to experience a lot. So where being locked up hasn't affected, or you wouldn't think would affect writers a whole lot because they're used to that anyway. But what about the psychological aspects of the rest of the world? It's kind of an interesting turn of events.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's there's two things I'd like to say in response to that. First of all, that's a really terrifying thought. All those people sitting at home who aren't used to it, but they're probably all written amazing novels that are now going to flood the market.
That's right.
And secondly, yes, absolutely. I'm used to spending time on my own, and that's how I normally work. I normally work in a kind of state of lockdown, more or less all the time. But what was different was the fact that the children were at home. My children were at home most of the year, and that made it really difficult because I had to do all the sort of looking after them and be at home and sort of be around where normally I'm able to work. So that was a bit of a challenge, but there were upsides to that too, because we spent a lot of time together that we otherwise wouldn't have done. So there's both sides to it, but it definitely wasn't the most conducive situation to write a novel, although it did mean that when I did get away to continue writing The Duchess, it was brilliant to be able to dive into the crazy 1920s and 30s and escape from the kind of crazy 2020s.
Absolutely. If I remember right, Wendy, when we talked last time, I began with the question that I ask all new writers that or people that I'm just meeting for the first time on the show, about your first memory of wanting to be a writer. And if I remember right, you told me this great story of your love of Enid Blyton when you were young, and how she had this way of talking about the characters that just kind of behind her eyes. They're always there, and she just had to connect with them. You have published one or two books in your life.
Sure,
yeah.
Yeah.
Look
I have
back
to
at
say,
your back catalog. This is like your 20th book.
She that was there were two things about her book actually. Even that I have no idea where this book came from or how it came into our house. It was quite an old book when I was a kid, and which was kind of like God, I mean, I wouldn't like to say how long ago it was that I first came across it, but it was a book from the 1950s. It was a big sort of old red book with big floppy cardboard covers, and yes, it was her autobiography. And there were two things that really struck me. First of all, the photographs of her completely amazing life. I mean, she had this fantastic house, beautiful house, and it had sort of tennis courts and horses and huge gardens, and I just thought, wow, that's what it's like, being an author. And she also described the process for her, which she said was basically sitting in a chair in a garden, in this beautiful garden, closing her eyes, and all her characters would appear behind her eyelids, like sort of characters on a movie screen. And then all she had to do was write down what they said and did. And I thought, wow, this is brilliant. This is really easy. But of course, when I started doing it, I realized that she was not entirely telling the truth because it's not quite that easy. Although I'm not saying it's the hardest job in the world, far from it. But it definitely wasn't as simple as Enid made it out to be.
which I don't know, makes us love her even more, that she can get away with telling a story like, I don't know. But
absolutely. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because she comes into a certain amount of condemnation and criticism in the UK, with people sort of she's I think she's always been cancelled for various things. I think she's been cancelled again kind of recently, but I just used to love her books. I loved her school stories, and so did my kids, who were much even in the sort of 10 or so years ago, my kids were lapping up the Mallory Towers books, and they're modern kids. So I think there's definitely something that appeals to everybody, really. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. With your book that we talked about last year, and with the governess, and now the Duchess that's coming out, or that's out now when people are hearing this show, you've had a bit of a turn in your writing career. You have written quite a number of comic novels, of funny kind of rom-com novels, if you want to look at it that way. And then you had the Laura Lake novels that you published, which kind of fit in one genre. And now with the governess and the Duchess, we're kind of firmly in the historical fiction.
Sure. Yes.
And there's been, it seems like you've shifted gears a little bit.
Absolutely.
What was it?
Oh, completely. Yeah. I think I always wanted to write historical novels. I mean, right from the beginning, really. But I sort of started writing comic novels, and I really enjoyed it, and I was very successful at it for a long time. But this urge to write something historical never really went away, and I knew even before The Crown was broadcast that I wanted to write some fiction about the Windsors, about the British royal family, because I could see that they were like characters in a novel. They are such huge personalities. They're so different from each other, and the storylines affecting them are so various. They're so dramatic. They're so funny sometimes, and so awful other times, and so unbelievable generally, that they're just kind of tailor-made for fiction. And I knew that I wanted to write about them, but I could never find the right way in. And it wasn't until I found Marion Crawford's story, The Little Princesses, which became The Governess, which became my novel last year, The Governess, that I found the way in. And after that, I decided that I would write historical novels, because I finally found what I wanted. So, and also, I was getting sort of middle-aged, really, and I just, the sort of rom-com genre, I mean, it's sort of okay for, maybe it's a younger person's type of book to write, I just found myself getting more drawn towards these historical dramas that I wanted to write. So they call it a pivot, as I'm sure you know, in the industry. And so I pivoted from comic fiction to historical novels. But that's not to say that there isn't actually a certain amount of comedy in what I'm writing at the moment. I mean, I don't write them as comedies, obviously, but I think the higher the stakes in any situation, particularly when it comes to royalty, where there's such an enormous gap between the public facade and the private person, the possibilities and potential for slip-ups, for farce, for all kinds of amusing things to happen in order to bridge that gap between the public and the private. I've come across lots of sort of amazing stories and amusing stories that sort of inform these and humanize these great historical dramas that we all know about. And actually, Wallis Simpson is a really good example of that, because she was a really funny person. She was a really warm person. She was, very easygoing, very different character I discovered in my research from the person who everybody thinks they know. This, very, in Britain in particular, she's characterized as someone who is very calculating, very ambitious, very materialistic, and, and of course, is credited with taking Edward VIII away from the royal family and from Britain and from the throne. So she gets a really bad rap. And one of the things I wanted to do is show her as the person I saw her as, which is a completely different character. And in fact, it was the character I came across when I was researching her. Her autobiography is full of humour, particularly when she talks about her early years in London. She's very funny about the fact that she can't understand what Cockney people are saying, and she's very funny when she talks about how they used to treat her in the shops. They thought that she was a kind of stupid woman who didn't know what she wanted, but then she would produce her Fanny Farmer cookbook from the depths of her basket, and she would make the butcher give her exactly the cut she wanted, and she was nobody's fool. So she was just a kind of really feisty, brave woman, I thought, starting a new life in an alien city where nobody was very nice to her. And so I became drawn to this story. And how did a woman who knew nobody, who had no, she had no friends, she had no money. The only person she really knew was Ernest, who was nice, but he wasn't wealthy, he wasn't well connected. He was very busy with his shipping empire. Well, it wasn't an empire, it was just his shipping business, which was not doing very well. Wallis was left all by herself. She was very lonely, it was a lonely life. So I became interested in how a woman in this situation became this notorious creature who was the dazzling favourite of the most eligible man on the planet. So that's what the Duchess is about, tracing that journey. And the Wallis I've uncovered is a really different character from this unpleasant person that she's always presented as. So that was, I think I'm breaking new ground with her, really. Fictionally anyway. I think there've been biographies, and certainly her own autobiography, which makes that case. But this is the first fictional version of her, which presents her in a really positive light.
Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web. What Death Taught Tarrant by Derek McFadden. Life is a journey. So is the afterlife. At the end of his life, Terrence MacDonald must discover its meaning, or he'll be banned from the afterlife forever, and his soul will cease to exist. Join Terence and those who love him on a poignant and unforgettable journey through a life at once wonderful and harrowing. Learn what Terence learned. See what Terence sees. By this provocative story's end, readers may even learn a thing or two about themselves. See why people are saying things like, Derek McFadden writes with an insight few can match. If you like the works of Mitch Albom, I think you'll find What Death Taught Terence a worthy addition to your library, and the reading of it a life-affirming journey. I found the story immediately immersive, and it stuck with me long after I finished. What Death Taught Terence by Derek McFadden, on sale now.
It's so fascinating because you use the term humanizing when you're talking about humor in serious fiction, because as humans that is an integral part of who we are, is the ability to find humorous elements in everyday life, and that's kind of become a hallmark of your historical fiction, is finding these humanizing elements. I mean, in The Royal Governess, we're talking about Queen Elizabeth as a child, and what's more humanizing than showing kind of what makes the person. And you've done that in the same way. Well, I mean, in a different light, but you've done kind of the same work with the Duchess to humanize this character that, I mean, we don't even think of Wallis as a person anymore. She's a character in this grand drama that we see unfolding on the world stage. What sort of things did you look for in humanizing Wallis to make her a real three-dimensional person with the same struggles, the same loves, the same wants and desires, and what sort of touch points do you look for when you're trying to humanize a character?
Well, with Wallis, it wasn't difficult because she describes she wrote an autobiography in the 50s, and with the amazing title of The Heart Has Its Reasons, which is kind of slightly cryptic and slightly crazy title. And but she describes her life and her early life, which was pretty difficult. She had a really tough childhood with her mother was a sort of peripatetic and impulsive character who sort of moved around a lot. And Wallis had a very insecure childhood. They were very close. But there was not a lot of money, and she was very, never really sure where she'd be living sort of 1 month to the next. And then she made an absolutely disastrous marriage to a Navy pilot who turned out to be sort of violent alcoholic, and really she had the most awful time with him. And that was the first divorce. So when I got as far as that, I was already thinking, well, hang on a minute, these are terrible experiences. So for a start, I could see that that you didn't have to try very hard to humanize someone who'd been through that. So, and that was before she even came to Britain and had a really rough time trying to fit in London and being cold-shouldered by these snotty British who didn't want to include her in or invite her to things because she was, divorced, foreign and obscure. So she had to face quite a lot of difficulty, but she was always resilient about it, and she was always brave, and she was always humorous and graceful and made the best of things. And there's a sort of spirit to her that came through all these situations, a spirit of endurance, a sort of optimism, which I would characterize, and certainly Edward VIII, and obviously the Prince of Wales as he was when he met her, characterized as American, completely as an American spirit, because her Americanness and the fact she was American was absolutely crucial for him, because he completely adored the States. He completely loved it. Edward VIII was mad about America, and one of the reasons was that his father was not interested in it. His father, George V, I don't think ever went out of Britain. He used to go to Bognor Regis, this sort of boring seaside resort on the south coast, but that was pretty much it, and up to Scotland. But really rather prided himself on never leaving the country. So for Edward, for his son, America was the opposite. It was new. It was it was modern, it was fashionable, it was fun, it was jazzy, it was inventive, it was irreverent. It was a republic, crucially, because he wasn't, despite the fact he was the Prince of Wales, he wasn't really very keen at all on being king. So her Americanness and her she had a sort of easy way with her. And it wasn't that she was in any way rude, she wasn't in any way sort of disrespectful, but she had a sort of ease of manner. Well, her manners were perfect, but there was an ease about her, and she wasn't sycophantic. She didn't fawn over him, and she also encouraged him in something that was terribly important to him, which is the idea of modernizing the monarchy. He felt that it was completely out of touch and ridiculously stuffy and absolutely remote in a kind of Victorian way, and he wanted to make it kind of relatable to the people, and she encouraged him with this. And she was the only person who did. Everybody else thought he was completely mad, and I actually wonder if they weren't right, because I think one of the great problems you always come across in anybody trying to modernize the monarchy, it finds that it really isn't modernizable actually. But the struggle is quite interesting, and the attempts to make it relatable and the attempts to update it are always really interesting, but they always fail. And in fact, all my three, I'm now writing another novel on the same subject, which I suppose we'll come to, but all my novels so far on this theme, the Royal Governess and the Duchess, have been about women who came from a different way of life, from a different place into the royal family, and tried to shake it up, tried to make a difference, tried to modernize it. And it always was an absolute disaster, personal disaster for them. Although in all those cases, the Windsors benefited, in the sense of in the Royal Governess, for example, Marion Crawford, her attempts to introduce the Queen to normal life and take her shopping, take her swimming, take her on the tube, all this stuff, has arguably help make the Queen this relatable figure she is now. That early experience, and of course Wallis's introduction into the royal family was a bomb, and it blew Edward off the throne. And of course the person who replaced him was George VI, and who is the father of the Queen, and she's universally agreed to be the world's most successful and certainly the most enduring monarch. So the Windsors always benefit from these efforts to update them, but the updaters always have a really hard time. So it's an interesting area to look into. But back to your question, that was that it wasn't hard to humanize Wallis, because there's a lot human about her story. There's a lot that's very moving. I really felt for this child that she'd been. She went to Baltimore's second best school. It's a bit like it's a bit like Shakespeare in his second best bed. He went to the second best school, and she was surrounded by all these wealthy girls, and she had no money herself, and they didn't invite her to parties. And he doesn't feel sorry for a child in that situation. And then this awful husband, the beaten wife. She was only 19. It's just a terrible story. And so when she finally found Ernest, he was a port in a storm. But again, the port that he brought her to in London was an alien and unfriendly place. So she suffered. She had a difficult time, but she came through, and she became this the world's most famous American, probably. So I think it's a great story. So there was a lot to go at, but it wasn't hard to find what made her a human being.
How do you, when you've defined what your topic is going to be, or who is going to be the focus of the story that you're going to tell, when you're dealing with people that have sort of been institutionalized or made an institution of is probably a better way of saying that, like the Queen, or someone that is attached to the royal family like Wallis is. How do you go about finding reliable sources that let you tell that can give you the background that's not kind of the story that's been set in stone? How do you find these interesting facts about people that are that everything is so closely guarded?
Sure. Well, in the case of the royal governess, I was using one of my main sources was Marion Crawford's own autobiography, The Little Princesses. So that was a really good source. But I was also able to, most of the incidents that are described in the autobiographies that I use are recorded elsewhere from other different points of view. So you can see the same incident from all kinds of different perspectives, and you get a pretty good idea of what you think really happened. But in the case of Wallis, there's plenty of primary sources. I mean, which weren't always available. So, for example, in the 80s, a cache of letters, the letters that the Duke and Duchess of Windsor wrote to each other from the 1930s onwards, was published, and that was a really, really useful source for me because it showed the kind of person that I thought she was, the kind of person who didn't want him to abdicate, that wasn't calculating, that didn't realise until far too late that this is what was going to happen. So that was a really good source of material. But there's quite a lot about her. Some goods, I mean, that some people the thing about Wallis Simpson is that everyone's got a point of view, and so even histories that are supposed to be that set out to be, even-handed, always take sides, and most people are very critical of her. And I kind of felt that she's always taken all the blame for what happened, and I don't think actually it was her fault at all. And the more I looked into her story, the more convinced I became of this. And it began really, I mean, the whole book, the whole story of the Duchess began when I was writing the royal governess, because she pops into that story kind of about halfway through, and she was going to be just a kind of scene. It was going to be just one little scene, what happened was Marion Crawford goes to Balmoral with the Little Princesses. It's a summer holiday, and she meets Wallis Simpson when she's out walking. And Wallis has just come to Scotland. She's been summoned by the king, by Edward VIII. He's at Balmoral at the castle, and she's come to. She came to, and this really happened. She arrived at Aberdeen railway station, and she was met by the king. The king picked her up, took her to the castle. But at the point in the story when Marion Crawford meets her, Wallis is very angry and upset. And she's angry and upset because what subsequently happened after the king picked her up was this absolutely massive row that broke out in the local Scottish press about the fact that the king was supposed to have opened a hospital and had blown them out so he'd go and pick up Wallis from the station. And the hospital didn't know that that's what he was doing, but he was photographed at the station. So they put two and two together, and they thought, oh, well, great. He was supposed to be opening this hospital, and he's gone to meet his mistress. Well, what kind of a king is that? And it's all her fault. And so she had to deal with this. And when I was sort of thinking about it and writing the scene, it struck me that Wallis Simpson would have had absolutely no idea that he was supposed to be opening a hospital. She would have arrived at the station, he would have been there, they'd have got in the car, and that would have been that. And it was only when she saw the papers that she would have realised what he'd done, and that she was taking the blame. And from that small incident, although it was a fairly big one for Scotland, and they were furious, the Scots really never got over it, I thought, well, hang on a minute, what else has Wallis got blamed for that she didn't, that wasn't actually her fault? And that led me through a series of events, large and small, inevitably towards the big thing that she always got blamed for, the abdication. And I began to wonder, well, was that really her fault? Was that really because she wanted to be queen, or she wanted to marry him, or all the things that she's always blamed for? And I looked into the story. The more I looked into because it was a really weird event. The abdication was a really, really strange thing, not just because it was the king leaving his throne. It was more the circumstances surrounding it were completely bizarre, and they're very, very, very complicated. So you have to read it a lot and go over the same events a lot before you get a clear idea of what was going on. And the one thing that I could never understand, even no matter how many times I read it about it, was why Edward insisted on marrying Wallis before he was crowned. I mean, that was one of the major sticking points. He insisted. The abdication happened in December 1936, and the coronation was scheduled for May 1937. And so if he'd sort of hung on, another few months and been crowned, it would have been this kind of multimedia spectacular. It would have been the biggest thing that ever happened. It would have had billions of people listening in, all over the world on the radio, obviously because there wasn't telly then. It would have, there would have been films, news films. It would have been the biggest thing ever. And he would have been so insanely popular that he could have done anything. And he would certainly have been able to marry her after that. But he didn't hang on. And I just couldn't understand that. And then it wasn't until I started to think, oh, hang on, he wanted to leave the throne, and he used her. She was part of his get out, and part of his attraction, her attraction for him, was the fact that she was so wrong. She was the worst possible choice as a wife, because she was divorced, which was the main sticking point, because the Church of England, of which she was head, did not allow divorce. So that was out of the question. She was a divorced woman. She was, not an aristocrat. She was foreign, all those things, but mainly she was a divorcee. He was absolutely determined to marry her, even though everybody, the state, the government, the colonies, everybody was saying no. So I thought, when I started to think of it as something that he wanted to do and that he was using her in order to facilitate it, it all completely made sense. And I do actually think that that's what happened. I think that he insisted on marrying Wallis so he wouldn't have to be king. And he knew he'd be a rubbish king, and he wanted to abdicate. And she didn't make him. He wanted to do it. And I don't think she realised until it was far too late that that's what he intended. So, yeah, that all began with a kind of trip to a railway station. So, yeah, I think she was, and it must have been a horrible moment. And it was great fun to write it in the Duchess, this dramatic moment when she thought, but this is all a plan, and I'm stuck.
Well, with bringing all of that to light, do you think that people will think of Wallis in a different light now?
I really hope so. Yeah, I really hope so, because I think she deserves to be thought of in a different light. I mean, I think she's been treated so badly by history. She's always been written up as a villain of the piece, and I don't think she was the villain of the piece. I think Edward was the villain of the piece, although I think he did it for good reasons. I think he actually genuinely thought it was a good idea to make way for his brother. And I think he was right. I mean, his brother was a good king, and of course the Queen, as I said, is a great queen. So it was the right thing to do. But of course, all they've ever got was just totally, just been completely vilified and criticised, and the worst criticism in the world, really, in some cases. So I think it's all they've been very badly treated by history, but it's fun to write about somebody about who people have got such strong views and challenge them and invite them to look at her in a different light. So that's been fun. It's been fun to break new ground.
Well, with the Duchess, be prepared to have everything that you thought you knew questioned and turned on its head. Wendy, I love the new book. We're going to send everyone to pick up a copy of The Duchess. What are you working on now? Because I know that there's another story brewing that
there's
you are going to...
another story brewing, Hank. Totally, yes. Another story brewing. It's my third... I'm thinking of these as a trilogy. They're sort of troublesome women in the House of Windsor, I suppose you could call it. And so... Yeah, so it's my third story is a similar trajectory. It's somebody who came from outside, although slightly more aristocratic than Wallis or Marion Crawford. Someone who came from outside, who came into the royal family, who thought it was one thing and found it was something else completely, and we're still living with the cataclysmic results of that situation. So you've now got to guess which woman it was, Hank.
I love it. I can't wait to see what's coming next.
It's Princess Diana, I have to tell you.
Oh, that's going to be amazing. Amazing.
It's the early years of Princess Diana. What made her, where did she come from? What shaped her? Why did she want to marry into the royal family? All those things. So so it's a really interesting story to research, and I'm in the middle of it now.
Well, and knowing you, you are going to make us view this story that we all think that we know so well in a new way, and I can't wait to see
Yeah.
what's coming.
Thank you, Hank. Well, I look forward to talking to you about it when it comes out.
Absolutely. And Wendy, if people are just discovering you, tell them where they can find you online to dig into all the great stuff that you do.
Thank you, Hank. You're being so kind to me. It's just lovely. Well, I've got a website called wendyholden.net, and if you go to that website, you'll find all my connections to Facebook, to Instagram, to Twitter, everything. So, and all the information about my books and me. So, that's wendyholden.net.
Fantastic. We'll link that up in the show notes of this episode. Go grab the Duchess today. When you're hearing this, it's available everywhere. Wendy, thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show.
Oh, thank you, Frank. Sorry, Hank. Sorry, Hank.
Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series.
Natalie, it's Artie. Listen, I'm going to be late for dinner. I ran out of gas on... He climbed out of the car and peered at the sign. On Sleepy Hollow Road. There's nothing but trees, and I have to find a gas station. Save me a drumstick. He hung up his cell and stuck it in his pocket, zipping his jacket. He was going to have to walk and pray somebody picked him up. A sliver of crescent moon hung above, surrounded by clouds, like a grinning drunk asleep in a puddle. Artie walked, using his tablet as a flashlight, eyes on the gravel ahead. He crossed over a dark ravine. The trunks and overhanging branches were matted thick with wild grapevines and threw a cavernous gloom over the road. A figure stood at a crossroads ahead. It looked pale and wan and blue. A woman? He had an impression of fragility and age and thought of his warty old landlady. But his landlady would not be standing at a crossroads in the dark. "Excuse me?" Artie said, surprised by the fear in his own voice. "Do you know where I can find a gas station? I'm empty." "Then let me fill you," the figure whispered. It rushed at him. It entered him. He dropped the tablet, fell to his knees, and lost his body to another driver. When Artie woke again, he was dangling in midair. The woods were pitch black. The only lights were fireflies. Fireflies everywhere, like dancing stars. He struggled and cried out, his yellow sneakers trying to find the ground. "Shh," said a voice. "It will all be over soon." Panic rose. He felt invisible hands on his legs, on his arms, invisible fingers around his neck, reaching up the back of his shirt. He heard the sound of water running below, high and agitated, as if through a stony brook. The crescent moon swung out of the sky, falling into the water. Blood rushed into his cheeks. He realized he had been flipped upside down. He yelled and groped, flecking his own face with spit, helpless to drive away whatever was attacking him. He felt a sharp pain between his shoulder blades, and air flew out of his lungs. A spray of blood hit his cheeks, hot and clinging. His hands found a sharp branch protruding from his body. It had speared him through his back and out through his chest. He tried to say help, but had no air to form the word. Blood poured up his body. No, it poured down. It only felt as if it were rising, climbing his neck, covering his face, gathering in his scalp. He reached for the ribbon of blood that fell from his crown into the trickle of moonlight below. The ribbon slipped through his fingers. It thinned, choked, became a tiny rivulet. His tanks were empty. Not even fumes. His engine began to sputter. The flow became a drip, a maddening drip like the drip, drip, drip of his kitchen faucet. The drip his landlady hadn't fixed. The drip that kept him up at night. This drip would not be keeping him up. He would sleep very well this night. Very well indeed. The fireflies slipped into shadow. A figure appeared, blue as gaslight, bony and toothless. A crone from a fairy tale. "Thank you, my friends," she whispered. I am thankful for this good harvest. She neared, scrutinized him with manic intensity, and turned away, muttering to herself in a sing-song rhythm as she, too, vanished into the trees. A man may toil from sun to sun, but a woman's work is never done.